Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to Heartbeat.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Heartbeat here on Converge Media. I'm your host, Cindi Bright. Thank you for joining us this evening as we're about to have a wonderful conversation about the impact of education, K-12 education for Black children here in the Seattle area. Before I begin, I just want to make a couple of statements. I want us to start deeply paying attention to what's happening in our education system here in Washington State. Now, you're going to get to hear tonight, we have three phenomenal guests along with my co-host, Stefani Coverson, well, and Teresa Richardson. We have to pay attention to what is happening here with our children. We have to pay attention to funding and where funding is going and not going. Because all of us know that the ticket, the key to success for Black children, for Black people, is to have access to education. Let me introduce in my co-host who's on with me every week with me. She's usually over StreamYard, but I've got her in the studio here with me today. So let's welcome Stefani Coverson in with me today. Stefani is the CEO of Jamii Pae Consulting. She formerly worked in the Seattle public school system, which is really why I wanted her here to engage with us on this conversation. We have three esteemed guests. We have one local guest, Dave Watson, who is the principal of Rainier Valley Leadership Academy. Dave, welcome on to Heartbeat this evening with us. We also have two national guests on with us. We have Naomi Shelton out of Washington, D.C. She is the CEO of the Charter Association. And we have Ron Rice, who is the Director of Government Affairs in the charter school space. So let's welcome everybody onto Heartbeat tonight so we can have this discussion. So Naomi and Ron and Dave, welcome to Heartbeat this evening.
Thanks for having us.
All right, can you guys see us okay here?
I'm good.
Sure can.
All right, I apologize for running a few minutes late this evening. Thank you, I know you guys are on the East Coast, so thank you for calling in at this hour back there. I wanted to start off because I wanted to just kind of do kind of a level set and talk about the state of public charters for Black students. Let's start at the national level across the country. Can you just kind of give us, Naomi, I'll start with you, just an overview of kind of what some of the issues are post-COVID, K-12 education, what's happening in the charter school space with Black kids?
Well, again, thank you for having me this evening. I'm Naomi Shelton, the CEO of the National Charter Collaborative. Our organization is focused on supporting single-site charter leaders of color. That includes Black, Brown, and Indigenous charter school leaders who run small, what we often call mom and pop charter schools. And as I talk to my fellow colleagues across the country and here in DC, some of the concerns that they have are persistent with what was happening prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic has also added another layer of complexity to what they have to address on a regular basis. So in addition to the challenges that they've seen in terms of family dynamics, funding, and other operational issues within their schools, they're also dealing with students who are faced with the challenges of having 2.5 years of virtual learning. And in addition to that, they're also dealing with the ongoing ramifications of COVID. We still see issues around violence and all types of things that have just continued to rear their head because of the challenges that are happening in the system before COVID, and this has only exacerbated that. But folks are, doubling down their efforts, making sure that they have the resources that they need and advocating for themselves, and also stepping in the gaps for families from the time that the pandemic started, and they've continued to do so.
Yes, I appreciate that. Naomi, we're just going to take a quick, we're having some technical issues here in the studio. Let me go to commercial really quick. We'll be right back in just a couple minutes.
Sounds good.
COVID-19 hurt my income, my health, and my family. We were about to lose our home when we heard we might be eligible for homeowner assistance funds from the government. We called 1-877-894-HOME, and a housing counselor stepped in. They talked to our lender and saved our home. Because falling on hard times does not have to mean losing your home. Federal funding details at washingtonhaf.org.
What up, y'all? T-Dub here, as always, bringing you the news and art funding and opportunities. This year's For Culture Project grants are live now, and here's what you need to know to apply. For Culture Project grants fund cultural activities and projects throughout King County. If you are an individual or group with arts, heritage, or preservation at its core, then this funding is for you. And if you're new to the grant application process, For Culture hosts virtual workshops and has a team of grant managers ready to assist you in the process. The deadline to apply is March 23rd. Head over to forculture.org for more.
What's up, everybody? You know, me and Besa, my girl, we had to pull up to Market Street Shoes once again, y'all.
And you know, we do this every season. We have to get the new shoes, the new boots, and this time I even got a coat.
Yeah, no, you did walk in without a coat.
I really
I'm glad
did.
you found one. But their boots were on point.
Yes, the boots, the bags. I even grabbed a flannel.
Yeah, you did. You know, and I was able to get some hats and everything. I was really impressed.
And you know, I was impressed because, of course, I got those white boots that you guys see me wearing everywhere these days.
Yeah, no, I look at your white boots and I'm like, darn it, they only have one pair. Me and Besa wear the same size. Of course, every time we walk out with several bags in hand.
Several bags and sometimes even a backpack, you guys. Make sure you check out Market Street Shoes.
Yeah, please check them out. Where they go, Besa?
Ooh, 2232 Northwest Market Street, Seattle, Washington.
COVID-19 hurt my income, my health, and my family. We were about to lose our home when we heard we might be eligible for homeowner assistance funds from the government. We called 1-877-894-HOME, and a housing counselor stepped in. They talked to our lender and saved our home. Because falling on hard times does not have to mean losing your home. Federal funding details at washingtonhaf.org.
Welcome back to Heartbeat. I'm your host, Cindi here on Converge Media. I apologize for having some technical difficulties here in the studio. Let's bring back in our guests, Naomi Shelton and Rob Lawrence. And so, first off, can you both hear me?
Having a little trouble.
Little trouble.
Can you hear me better this way?
Yes.
Yes.
Better. Okay, we're going to send to microphone. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for bearing with us tonight. Naomi, I was listening to you've given us an overview of post-COVID, what's been happening with Black children in the K-12 education across the country. And what I heard you saying were things around violence, and maybe could you recap what you were saying to us before we went to break?
Sure. That a lot of the issues that school leaders are facing now are just exacerbated issues that they were having to manage and navigate before. The pandemic has put a strain and stress on communities and the health and wellness of how people show up, and that has been a greater challenge for school leaders of color. We've also had the health challenges that have impacted families, which means not only students, families, and other community members, but staff. Folks have not been able to bounce back as we often do, but after significant tragedies. And so those issues, those concerns, those things that were happening before are just exacerbated. But people are persistent and being very thoughtful about how they approach their work, how they approach continuing to build and deepen community, but also, having a deeper sense of commitment to the educational outcomes for students as we think about pandemic recovery and what that means for the academic achievement of students of color.
Yes. We have Dave Clark, Dave Watson here. I'm gravel because stuff. We have Dave Watson here with us he's the principal at Rainier Valley Leadership Academy here in the Seattle area. Let's bring Dave in with us because I want to ask Dave about what his observations have been here at the Leadership Academy. And you just recently taken over as the principal of the school. Can you talk to our audience about what your observations are about what they found for children post-COVID and what some of the challenges are there?
Absolutely, thank you. Dave Watson, proud principal of RVLA. And one thing I really want to say is that when it comes to our scholars in the building, everyone is the pandemic. Some individuals think this is post-pandemic, but let's be honest, we are still in the pandemic. And the way that it's impacting our scholars, not just at RVLA, but when I understand just across the country, it's different when you are in a space where you can just be confined to your home and be comfortable in that space and then come back to school. There are a lot of mental health struggles that our scholars have, not just our scholars, but our staff members as well. Fortunately, for RVLA, we do have mental health therapists in the building. We also have what's called a Southern Clinic, which is an organization that we partnership with to provide healthcare services to our scholars and our staff members as well. In a nutshell, this is something that is brand new to all of us. Granted, everyone's doing the best job that they possibly can do, but it's still impacting not just our scholars, but our staff members in daily life because it's something brand new. We really haven't been taught those social cues, those ways of coping with these types of things at this level because it's still something brand new, not just for our scholars, but for the country alone.
Are all the students back in person?
All of our scholars are in person. We have approximately 147 scholars that are in the building right now. But yes, they are back in person, so there's no more remote work.
And can you talk to us and before I bring him on, we'll get to Ron's role and what he does in the charter space. Can you talk to us about the advocacy work that is being done on behalf of public charter schools here to help your school, to help your scholars to be able to be successful? Is there advocacy work happening for us at the state level?
What we experience at RVLA, our advocacy level comes from not just our staff, not just our community members. That's a large part of advocacy that a lot of individuals really may not have in their school building. But RVLA is one of those organizations where we are a community-based school. We are owned by the community, so we consistently welcome and ask for that type of advocacy to come from our community because they are the ones that have access to community, to the building at any time they want to. They are the ones that want to drop their scholars off. Our school is open to the entire community, and so we would ask those organizations who advocate for scholars, we welcome them inside of our building so they can have those one-on-one relationships and just have those conversations with our scholars face to face. Yes, we are a free public system.
Okay. My co-host Stephanie is here with me. Stephanie has worked in the public school system, and Stephanie, I love it in fully diving into teachers and kind of having our kids be able to have access to teachers that look like us. Do you have a point of view about Seattle Public Schools and their ability to help children succeed or not? Or do you have an overview of your thoughts about public schools here in the Seattle area?
I think I just have, thank you for hosting me in person tonight. I think what's really important to put into context is that the Seattle public school system is a system like any other public school in the country. And so it is a microcosm of the larger society. And issues, racism, sexism, all of these, misogyny, all of these different topics that I think are getting more mainstream airtime are also occurring in these school systems. And so talking about systems, I mean, the school systems are working just as intended, right? And so there are so many folks within Seattle Public Schools, for example, that are behind the scenes really working to make change. And the public school system is still a system, right? Working as intended. And so it was not built with Black and brown people, children, communities in mind. And so just even the fact that David is referring to students as scholars sets a completely different tone in terms of why these K through 12 youngsters are there, right? And so it's important for us as Black and brown people to have spaces to have life breathed into us as opposed to the stereotypes that we're typically faced with. Having our communities invited into these spaces and being co-collaborators in these spaces, as opposed to speaking as a parent, feeling like a Black parent constantly having to go to the school in an adversarial situation where you were trying to advocate for your child and sort of fighting against some of the labeling that Black students are subjected to. So I don't think this is per se a Seattle public school issue. This is a larger system issue, and it is time for radical reimagining of how our Black and brown babies are being educated.
Naomi, I bet you have something to add to what Stephanie just said.
Well, I think it's always important to center what the student needs are. We are thinking about all of the different components that go into running very small nonprofit schools, but at the center of all of that is what happens with students and how they show up every day and what they are able to get out of that experience. And in addition to the academic needs, of course, we see that those needs are even more challenging than before. Thinking through what are the social emotional things that students need at this point in time. We're also dealing with an onslaught of negative conceptions around what should be taught or not taught in schools. And again, having students have their selves affirmed makes all the difference in how they show up academically.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Naomi, a lot. You know, it is, you know, the power, you know, I like what you all are talking about with even reusing new terms in terms of how we address young children, scholars, teaching them about their own power, who they are, their capabilities. What, how would you articulate what's going on with respect to teachers here? both at the national level and then in the Seattle area, in terms of what RVLA, are your teachers fully Black educators? Is that what it's like?
No, we do not have all of our scholars that are Black teachers. No, we do have approximately 80% of our entire school staff are underrepresented majority.
Okay. Okay, that's awesome. Naomi, what observation do you have nationally about teachers that look like the students? Is that number increasing for our kids to be able to learn from?
Well, we know that across the country, there are not enough teachers of color. However, in charter schools, specifically charter schools that are led by people of color, there's an exorbitant amount of teachers that show up and are hired and are able to, persist in their roles in charter schools. And so there are multiple national efforts to see the number of Black teachers increase. Of course, there are other efforts that we would like to see to really think about teacher training as well. That if a student doesn't have a Black teacher or a teacher that looks like them, that teacher is also confident in being able to culturally affirm and be a thoughtful representative in the classroom. But what we do know is that in comparison to traditional district schools, charter schools do hire and retain teachers of color.
Let me bring Ron in, because I do want to talk about the advocacy. Ron, you are a director of government affairs, so that means that you are likely lobbying and doing things on behalf of students across the country. Can you talk to us about the work that you're doing in this space for Black children and Black charter schools? I think you might be on mute, Ron.
Okay. First, let me say it's an honor to be here and an honor to be with this panel to talk about some of these very important issues. My name is Ron Rice. I'm the Senior Director for Government Relations at the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. We are the sort of umbrella organization for charter school advocacy at the federal level. So we represent 3.7 million children that are attending charter schools across the country. Of that number, 900,000 are Black students, African American students. And so that's a significant portion of the total charter school group. And so we advocate for federal funding for the creation of new charter schools and the support and replication of existing high quality public charter schools across the country. And so that advocacy takes on many different roles. We fight for the one line item that we have in the federal budget called the Charter Schools Program, which funds new schools and supports facilities on some level. We have a state advocacy organization, or portion rather, that actually advocates for the creation of charter school laws in states that currently do not have them, of which there are about 5. And then to better the laws in existing states that currently have laws to make sure that they are the best laws possible to create the best schools possible that meet student need and parental and family demand in terms of the quality of education and the innovation that exists in charter schools because of the model. We also convene the largest conference every year of charter school advocates and school leaders and parents and the like. And we also have a branch that deals with lawsuits at the federal and at the state level, writing a number of supportive briefs for any sort of legal fight that may be happening. But the one thing I will say is that advocacy takes on many different roles nationally. And one of the things that I have emphasized in my advocacy is to make sure that leaders of color, particularly African-American leaders of charter schools, are highlighted, celebrated, supported, and introduced to federal lawmakers and legislators. I think oftentimes when we talk about charter schools, that gets lost in the mix, gets lost in the sauce. And a lot of our elected officials, particularly African-American and Latinx and white progressives, oftentimes have a really different view of what charter schools are, why leaders choose that model to educate kids. And so we try to introduce that as part of our overall advocacy. And to let them know some two basic facts, which I think are relevant for our discussion here. One is 33% of charter school leaders are leaders of color within our sector. And that's next to the fact that in traditional district schools, that number is 19%. Most people don't know that. And the second thing I think that is relevant to our discussion here is that Black students in charter schools are about 50% more likely to have a Black teacher than their district school counterparts. Again, these are things that most people do not know about charter schools, but I think it's certainly why parents of color, particularly Black parents, in poll after poll for the last 10 years are in support of charter schools, because they recognize one model does not fit all, but that they understand that charter schools, before it was fashionable, understood the need to have leaders of color, and those leaders of color have been quite emphatic in making sure they have staffs and administrators of color as well. You can't be me unless you see me. That's essentially what leaders that are African American at lead charter schools are saying and doing every day.
Well, is some of the controversy around I'm going to try to paraphrase what I heard you say, but, and my audience knows I have a little bit of cynicism when I talk about some of these issues, but charter schools are about choice. Am I correct? Like, parents want choices for their children. And when we think about what's happening in public school systems, or let's just talk broader, let's talk about daily shootings that are happening in schools, or let's talk about the fact that some schools still have student resource officers in them, which are police officers. And we know what happens when police officers are around brown and Black children. So why are I think you referenced the left or the quote unquote progressive people so resistant to give Black parents options and choices for where our children attend schools? What is that about?
So you're asking me, or you asking who my organization's opinion or my personal opinion?
You can give me both. I'm curious on the other side.
I can speak to it as a progressive, because I want to make sure that's my disclaimer. I'm a progressive. I was a Howard Dean supporter in 2004, former city council person, one of the first elected officials in New Jersey to support Barack Obama for president. I supported ban the box legislation as an elected official. I supported marriage equality before it was big and mainstream in New Jersey. And so I have bona fides as a progressive. But I will tell you that the consternation that white progressives have about charter schools is paternalism. And there's a lot of white progressives in America who think they speak for Black people, who think they can legislate for Black people, who think they know what's best for Black people, and are in certain positions to be the great white father or mother, depending on your gender and depending on where you are. The reality is that Black people, from as long as we have been liberated from slavery, have been very focused and very deliberate about making sure we had access to education, even if we had to create it ourselves. And so even when you look at the fact that the first schools that were created by the federal government after the Civil War, African Americans went out and got their families and their children and made sure they went to those schools. And when those schools did not provide adequate education, we created schools for ourselves. And that's why you still have existing schools, private schools like Piney Branch and others throughout this country. Even the Nation of Islam started Sister Clara Muhammad schools when they were against the schools at that time. You look at Marva Collins in Chicago, who was tired of the district schools miseducating and undereducating kids in her district, in her community, and she started a private school. And you look at the freedom schools that started in the 60s to teach education that was not being taught in traditional district schools. And so it's in our DNA as Black people to start schools, and charter schools are just that most modern model to do so in a public sector way. But white progressives have always tried to dictate to us our educational limits, our educational ceilings, and that continues to be the case today, although it's not called that. It certainly is that if you look at the results that have happened in terms of our kids. Our babies are not learning, and they're not learning because in a lot of ways, white progressives are standing in the way of what Black parents want for their children.
This is I'm going to ask Dave this question. Is part of this problem also, so I hear you wrong about you're describing, I think the term that we're using now in society is kind of white savior, and coming in to speak forward or step forward for brown and black people and brown and black families. Let me just ask you, what are your parents saying about the parents who transitioned from some of these other schools that are bringing their kids over to RVLA? What's their messages and their reasons, and what they're saying about why they wanted to change schools?
Well, a lot of the reasons why they wanted to change schools was, number one, some schools were too large, and they wanted to make sure that their scholars not feel like they were just a number. Other times, there's certain services that are provided. So let's say, for example, we have our scholarships and special education services. Average percentage of districts who have scholarships and special education services is about 32%. RVLA, 27% of our scholars receive special education services. The reason why is because we do not turn scholars away. We want to make sure that every scholar is receiving every accommodation, anything that they need in order to be successful. Another reason why they're making this change, this transition, is because within charter schools at RVLA, Rainier Valley Leadership Academy, we focus on anti-racist curriculum. And so we focus on this curriculum. It teaches our scholars exactly what happened in history, how it happened. It's not based on something that we read in the same textbooks that we utilize in real school. So that narrative changes, and what's most important about that is our scholars are able to see the positive contributions that individuals that look like they have AIDS in mainstream society that somehow are cut out during typical or the average education that a scholar receives. Somehow. So we really focus on that because we want individuals to understand, number one, that you are important. Number two, that you have a voice. We want you to love yourself. But we also want you to know that there's inventions, there's contributions that were made to this society that meets on a daily basis that were brushed over because they were invented by a person, brown, black, skin.
I appreciate that. Stephanie, did you have something to add to that as well?
Yes, all of that. And also, I've been thinking a lot around language and accountability. And so many of our children are labeled as, for example, at-risk youth. So just magically and miraculously that they are at risk for something, right? And it is important for Black and brown students to be in an environment that puts context to their lived experiences, right? That it is, you are not unintelligent. You are not unimportant. You matter, you're loved, you're beloved, and you can do anything that as big as you want to dream. And so, again, traditional public school systems are a microcosm of the larger society. And so you do have administrators and teachers in those spaces telling our children to dream smaller because of the stereotypes about what spaces we're supposed to be in, what degrees we're supposed to have, and what we are supposed to invent, create, and infect. I also this is real segregation, and spoiler alert, it really hasn't ended. But the round before the end of segregation, we had Black students being folded into these systems that were already created and in history about the global majority, about who we are, what we do, what we're about, all of those things. And so then, we are sending our children into these environments that are already stacked against us with perception that then influences reality. And so when the school systems were desegregated, they were not colonized, they were not repaired. And so just by design, the school system is continuing to operate in the way that it is operated in time immemorial. And so our children are being negatively harmed and impacted by that, as well as being told to dream smaller, be smaller, and not be seen, not compete, don't get too uppity.
We here in Washington State, and these are great points, because we here in Washington State have an elected official who is the chair of our education committee, who has said publicly on this show that not all kids can think deep, right? They aren't deep thinkers. And I almost fell in my chair when I heard the chair of the education committee say something like that, because what that is saying is that they're advocating, or the people that are supposed to be representing our children are in dumbing down graduation requirements. They are in dumbing down that our kids are not capable. It's the point that you're making, that we've actually just watched play out in the news in the sports arena in the last couple of days, right? The portrayal, that's why we do Black media. This is why we do this, because our voices and our messages, our children need our help, and they need our advocacy. I'm going to go to a commercial break, and then come right back.
Half that up in Saks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah.
What's up, everybody? You know, me and Besa, my girl, we had to pull up to Market Street Shoes once again, y'all.
And you know, we do this every season. We have to get the new shoes, the new boots, and this time I even got a coat.
Yeah, no, you did walk in without a coat.
I really
I'm glad
did.
you found one. But their boots were on point.
Yes, the boots, the bags. I even grabbed a flannel.
Yeah, you did. You know, and I was able to get some hats and everything. I was really impressed.
And you know, I was impressed because, of course, I got those white boots that you guys see me wearing everywhere these days.
Yeah, no, I look at your white boots and I'm like, darn it, they only have one pair. Me and Besa wear the same size. Of course, every time we walk out with several bags in hand.
Several bags and sometimes even a backpack, you guys. Make sure you check out Market Street Shoes.
Yeah, please check them out. Where they go, Besa?
Ooh, 2232 Northwest Market Street, Seattle, Washington. COVID-19 hurt my income, my health, and my family. We were about to lose our home when we heard we might be eligible for homeowner assistance funds from the government. We called 1-877-894-HOME, and a housing counselor stepped in. They talked to our lender and saved our home. Because falling on hard times does not have to mean losing your home. Federal funding details at washingtonhaf.org.
And we were just talking before we went to break about, I started getting a little snarky, I think, about what's going on in our legislatures about advocacy for Black children. But Naomi, what is your observation across the country about this issue? Like, do we have elected officials that are actually advocating for funding of charter schools in other states? We're not doing it here in Washington State, but are they doing it in other states?
She has to unmute herself.
I believe believe you're on mute, Naomi.
I am. Sorry about
Okay.
that. I would say that we are in a place where we probably don't have enough elected officials that are, one, well-versed enough to be able to understand the complexities of what's happening in terms of education funding. And we also have the issue of the narrative and the rhetoric around charter schools being so pervasive that makes it even that much more difficult to get people to really have a good grasp on what is happening in the charter school space. One of the things that my organization is focused on is making sure that we're amplifying the stories of Black, Brown, and Indigenous-led schools, so people know that the large monstrosities of CMOs that people think of are not the only charter schools in the country. And by supporting schools led by people of color, we are doing exactly what we were doing before Brown versus Board. We're focused on making sure that we're showing up for kids in a way that that not only supports them academically, but also in terms of identity. So we all know that elected officials themselves don't think that they are experts in a lot of the things that they do. They're really great at running for office, and they're hopefully great at running at raising money. But we do have more work to do in terms of getting people more informed about charter schools, and specifically charter schools led by people of color.
Here's a simple question. Do we think that Black children in Black-led charter schools are being punished because of the way charter schools have been historically run that have not included Black children?
So the reason my organization was founded was because of the disproportionate closures of charter schools led by people of color. They oftentimes don't have the same level of financial support. They don't have the same existing relationships that networks have, where they're able to solve problems, but also spread money in the same ways that larger CMOs are able to. And so a lot of the issues that they face are either related to financial issues. Occasionally you see schools that are not serving students well academically, but that also comes down to not having the same resources that other larger institutions have. And so I think that overall, I think your guest said it earlier, that all of our systems are a microcosm of our larger society. And so the things that are persistent and show up in terms of racism when it comes to traditional public schools that receive less funding because of the zip code where they sit, we see the same things happen for schools that are independent and are run by people of color.
Are our rates, I don't know if you know this, beyond RVLA, are the rates or the trends increasing for Black children opting out of Seattle public school system and coming into either independent schools or charter schools here?
We actually have quite a few scholars that are on our waiting list to become scholars at RVLA. And so we were just approved for our elementary expansion. So currently we're at 6th and 4th grade in a public charter school. We're going to transition to kindergarten to 5th grade as well. So we're going to be K through 12. So the numbers that are coming over, absolutely.
And do we have a requirement here in Washington State that for public schools that there is a per dollar fee that every student gets in public school systems?
The best way I can answer that question is
Disproportionately impacting our students, our scholars that way.
right. It's like they should pay more, but get less.
Ron, let's hear from you about those numbers. Do you have a perspective about the kids that are going in some of these charter schools across the country, what Dave just shared around how that money is being split from in here in Washington State, do you have a view about that in some of the other states, what that number looks like?
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing. Could you just repeat that question a little bit louder for me?
Yes, is this better?
Yes.
Okay. I was asking, were you able to hear Dave explain the 75% versus 25% funding here in Washington State, the public dollars when they come from that school district into the charter schools? Are other schools across the country splitting that money that you're aware of? And if so, do you know what those numbers look like?
Yeah, no, I think the point was made and it was correct. Nationally, charter schools get on average about 70 cents on the dollar in terms of per pupil aid that traditional district schools have. And then that's further demarcated by the fact that charter schools then have to use that 70% that they get to use for facilities, because charter schools typically in 95% of states do not get to participate in bond market sales of buildings. And so you literally have high quality blue ribbon award-winning charter schools existing in the basement of churches, or leasing out old warehouse spaces where they didn't have to use dollars of their own or do their own fundraising to become ADA compliant. And so that's a national reality, is that charter schools on average have to do more with less. And then there's the ultimate end game of accountability, that if you don't meet your charter typically within 5 years of terms of your goals and objectives, your school could be closed for poor performance, which we support. But obviously the task is harder because the stakes are higher, the resources are lower, and the need to produce is at a greater level of accountability and observability than the traditional school counterparts.
And so does this infer then, probably a question for you, Dave and Ron, are our teachers that are working in the charter schools also working for fractions of what the market rates are to pay our educators?
I wouldn't say they're working for fractions. At the end of the day, it is a comparable wage, but not as high as some of the districts, not as high as some of the public districts here in the greater Seattle area.
And of the, I don't know if you know this, like part of the variable that's at play in public school systems are education unions, right? We have, I don't know enough about it to speak totally intelligent, but our educators in public schools are paying into unions, and unions are making a lot of money. And so is part of this problem that we have around funding into Black schools because the unions are taking more of that money and have more power in our states and are prohibiting or blocking the funding from coming to Black charter schools? Is that happening? I don't know, does anybody know the answer to that? Naomi, maybe you know?
That's always a complicated question to answer. We know that unions do have a tremendous amount of power and are very thoughtful about the way that they operate. So it's not a yes or no, but it is known that there are challenges to how charter school teachers that are not required to be unionized, those are dues that are no longer coming to that union. And so the thought of what that looks like at a national level, we've seen it play out politically, what that looks like at a local level in terms of actually protecting teachers who need protection. Those things are often in conflict, but at the same time, we see the necessity of what we're fighting for and what they are as well.
And I have to imagine that business, right, big business, small business, has to be concerned about this issue because this is their talent pool of people. This is the future generations. And if we're not able to get children access to education, this has a detriment to the economy. I mean, just think about it from an economics perspective. Is business fighting to help get these charter schools funded?
Wrong.
Certainly not enough. But we are working to build partnerships with organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the African American Chamber of Commerce, and a number of other nonprofit organizations that actually work and look at sort of workforce preparedness, particularly in the 21st century, and particularly as it compares to our ability to compete with international and other nations. Let's not forget that what the USA ranks in terms of educational output and proficiency is way behind nations like Singapore, for instance. And a nation can't stay as a number one nation in terms of economics and other facets of measurement unless the population are educated. Let me just also add that as the nation becomes more brown and blacker, the fact that our populations are the least educated or have the least access to quality education is going to be a problem with productivity for this nation in the future. So when I see a lot of people who are, racist or working on the wrong things within education, I tell people all the time, the lack of investment in public education in general is actually dooming this country to be a third level nation, because as the population that will be running aspects of this nation are not being educated at the level that they need to be, that brings down the whole nation. And so an investment not only in charter schools, but an investment in anything that's innovative in education publicly in K through 12 needs to be invested in, replicated and expanded and grown for the betterment and the national security, quite frankly, of America.
And where are we ranked 48th in the nation? Is that right?
I could not hear that, sorry.
Are we in the United States ranked 48th out of 50th in terms of our education access and levels of graduation and so forth?
Naomi may have a better idea. We're not that bad, thankfully, but we are definitely in the 10 and 12th rankings. In some places, we are 30th, and depending on how you measure it in terms of proficiency, whether it be there's a lot of ways of measuring those types of things. But when you look at overall status, I've seen numbers that say we are 12th in the world. That's the developed world. And there's some places that actually rank us 33rd in the world. And so we're not ranked high. We're definitely not in the top 10 in most indices and most measurements about educational outcomes and outputs for American students.
And then maybe my final question that I'll ask of the entire group here is, what should we be doing collectively to solve this problem? What is it across this country we as Black people need to be doing collectively to advance access to charter schools, which is education, for our kids? What thoughts do you all have? I'll start with you on the East Coast since it's late for you. Naomi, what do you think we should be doing collectively?
I am on mute again. I apologize. It is late on this side of the world. I think anything that people are so adamantly against, especially people who do not look like us, who are adamantly against and are pushing rhetoric that does not serve us, we should be investigating and learning more about. And so I would encourage people to learn more about the Black, Brown, and Indigenous schools here in the country through the National Charter Collaborative, but also do a little research. There are authorizers throughout the country that can share information. There are charter support organizations that can provide more information, but to not believe what you often hear and see, because often the people that are doing the lion's share of the work are the folks who have their heads down and are doing that work. They don't have the time to come up with messaging to counter all of the negative rhetoric. So learning more, hearing more, and actually seeing more leaders of color. We should also be investing in what it looks like to have a true pipeline to college. College and career is, of course, paramount when it comes to academic outcomes, but to encourage people to go into the space and continue to build upon the foundation of education we have for African Americans here in the country. So please visit chartercollab.org. learn more, visit schools, and at the end of the day, just be aware that folks are adamantly fighting against these options for parents for a reason that does not benefit our community overall.
Thank you for that. Ron, did you have some thoughts about what we should be doing collectively?
Yeah, Black people ought to be fighting for any school that is working and educating your child and be no respecter of model or type of public school, period. The reality is that, El Haj Malik El Shabazz said it best, education is our passport to the future. And the reality is that we cannot grow as a community. We cannot meet the needs of our families, of our community institutions, if we do not have an educated workforce, and that starts with K through 12 education. So we can't afford to leave anything on the table. I don't care what it's called. I don't care what model of it is. If it's working, if it's educating kids, if kids are being prepared for careers of choice, if kids are being prepared for college, if parents are satisfied, if it's safe, if it's clean, and the teachers that are there are representative of our communities, then that is a good school. And I don't care if it's a traditional school, or if it's a charter school, or community school, or magnet school. I'm no respecter of model. We have to grab whatever works, and we have to replicate and expand it based on the needs of our particular communities. And those who try to tell you otherwise, as Naomi said, do not have the best interests of our people at their heart, and they ought to be looked at with skewed and in an odd way when it comes to the salvation of our people. Our progress, our advancement needs to come from our hands and from parents and families that know what's best for them, and they should be empowered and they should be given the power they need to decide what's best in terms of their own children and the education for our kids.
Choice. Thank you for that. Dave, thoughts do you have?
I would say as a people, we need to organize and speak our voice. Quite often the education that we received when we were in school, we'd always want to go back and say, hey, if there was something I could do differently, I would do this. Or you know what, the entire educational system that I had failed me in a certain way. They should have told me the truth about A, B, C, and D. We know what type of educational system we have right now. It's the same one that we had when we were kids, same one that we were unhappy with. And at the same time, if we do not decide to stand up, take a stance, and voice our opinion, then we become part of the problem, not the solution. We need to make it a point to go and visit these schools and educate ourselves. If you are interested in a charter school, if you don't know what a charter school is, then you know what? Go find a charter school and visit one. Rainier Valley Leadership Academy, our doors are open all the time. We welcome all community members to come and see how we run our school, interact with our scholars. That's part of one thing that we do. It's a community-based school. So we want the community to come in, educate yourself, walk in the classroom, get a feel for a charter school for yourself. Don't believe what you necessarily see on TV or within some of the media platforms, because they're going to tell you, they're pretty much going to focus their news on fear and not reality. So we welcome individuals to come into our school, see what we look like, see the faces of our scholars. That way you know that these scholars within this building understand at an early age that they were not born a problem.
Thank you. Stephanie, what final thoughts do you have about that? That was powerful.
I don't know how to top that. I agree with everything that has been proposed by all of the guests here tonight. The only thing I think that I would add is time, talent, treasure, right? So if you can volunteer in a classroom, whether it's a charter school or another school in your neighborhood, do that. If you have a specific talent that you bring to the table, thinking about communications, marketing, using your talent to help get the message out. If you have financial needs, donate to charter school organizations that are supporting our Black and brown children. It's important to stay woke, right? And so that word has been co-opted and villainized, and I want to bring it back to the original meaning, that we have to pay attention to what is going on in our communities, the decisions that are on the table about our communities politically. We have to be active, we have to be involved, we have to use our voices. We have to show up at these school board meetings if, in our neighborhoods and traditional public schools, because that is that listening board upward into the state legislatures, governor's offices, and national offices. And the last thing I would say is every time an absentee ballot shows up in your mailbox, I don't care if it's a presidential election or an election for dog catcher, vote. So the progress that we make during presidential year elections typically slides back during those off years because we are not popping up in those ballots and we're not voting. So those are my takeaways.
I appreciate that. This conversation is necessary, and this conversation is and will continue until we achieve parity for education for brown and Black children. So let me thank Naomi, Ron, Dave, and Stephanie for being here and engaging in this conversation, because we must think, some of the powerful takeaways for us as a community. Vote, activism, use our voices, not allow other people who don't look like us to represent our voices in government structures. We do here in Washington State, we are in an election year for school boards. So it is time for all of us to get active and to follow up and make sure we are making sure our children are getting educated. To our viewers that joined us this evening, thank you for being a part of this conversation. We appreciate it. Please share this, promote this. This is a message that has to get out far and wide. Thank you again for joining us this evening. To everybody, have a good evening. We will see you next week.
Half that up in sacks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah. Yeah.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.